Morning. My name is Jill McCarthy, and I come from Central New York State. This morning, my presentation is titled Each Generation Has a Unique Purpose. That word generation has kind of been floating around in my mind for a couple of years now. And I used it 2 years ago when I was at a retreat. I was leading a retreat and I was talking to the ladies and I asked them to close their eyes a minute and look up towards the ceiling. And I want them, as they're looking up, as they're kind of studying that angle, looking towards the ceiling, I wanted them to imagine that there was a circle shape in the ceiling was just gently being wiped away clear, and that they could see up way beyond the ceiling, way up into the heavens. And I wanted them to imagine that there were people looking down over this edge, looking at them and studying at them. And some were smiling and some were cheering. And as they were looking up, I asked them to imagine that that is the cloud of witnesses, that the generations that came before looking at them and rooting for them. The name of that retreat was My Life is Fully Supported. And we kind of started out on that principle. Okay, you can gently put the ceiling back up over you so nothing falls. And I want you to think about it a minute. I went into Google and I found some women from different periods in time, and I cut out a face of them, and I asked each one of my participants to grab one of the faces. And among them, there was a pilgrim, there was Sally Ride, there was Susan B. Anthony, there were some pioneer people, and there was Rosie the Riveter. And I asked them to study their people and to think about them for a while. Each person grabbed one of the little photos. And I asked them, well, which one was the oldest. And well, we figured out that had to be the pilgrim lady. So we went to her first and we said, okay, so when she was leaving her home country, what was she hoping for? And easily they said, religious freedom, a new start, their own government, whatever. And that was easy to say. And then I said, what did they leave behind? And that one was a little harder. And when you go back to that time period, most likely when they were leaving, if their parents were still alive, they probably would never see them again. That's a very big thing to let go of. Their villages that were well established, they would be leaving behind. And that was up the medicines of the day, the camaraderie in an established community. Those were huge things to leave behind, but for the pilgrims, it was worth the risk. As we know, some of them did not even survive going across the ocean. Some did not survive the first winter. It was a challenging thing. Yes, in the long run, it was a wonderful thing for those of us who live here now. But it was a very big challenge. There's a going forward and there's a letting go behind. If you talk about the pioneer people, they were very similar. They were leaving an established village, leaving most likely their older relatives and going towards a place to establish their own land, to do farming, and to gain some new adventure. And they left behind, again, the civilization, the medication, many things that had to do with their hometowns. If you fast forward a little to Rosie the Riveter, she had to, she gave up being just at home, raising the children, taking care of the home, and she had to go to work in the industry to create supplies for the men who were in war. That was a big challenge. That was certainly a different lifestyle. But those women raised to that surface, raised to that call, and they did the job, and they became very good at it. And when the men came home, they wanted the jobs in the factories, and some of those women weren't so pleased with going back home again. Their eyes had been opened to some new possibilities. Obviously, with Sally Ride, her new possibilities was a teacher going into space to inspire the next generation. Well, that inspiration cost her life. Yes, it inspired many, and it continues to. But as we each goes forward, we let go of something behind us. Excuse me 1 second. I believe it was Pope Francis that said that the women can change the system of power. Well, that particularly fits the generation of the baby boomer women. And that's what I'm going to focus on here today. I happen to be one of those baby boomer women. And I came in, my parents were from the greatest generation. That they grew up. My dad served in the army. My mother was around when you had to ration out. If you had aluminum foil, you put it back in the cupboard and reused it and reused it and reused it because you weren't supposed to waste such precious commodities. And yes, that was a very difficult stage in life, and we're grateful for what those service people did then and what those at home did to be supportive. And it was a challenging time. It was a time when men came home and they didn't talk about what happened in war. Some of those things were so horrendous, and yet they pushed that down inside because men weren't allowed the tears. They weren't allowed to say how upsetting the things, the sights, the horrific sights that they saw. In that greatest generation, whether it be male or female, push their emotions down inside. And then they had children, and our parents didn't have that emotional capacity to be emotionally supportive. Did they love us? Absolutely. But there was that piece they had to push behind, was their feelings. And as a baby boomer grown up, when our children came along, all of a sudden the world's all about children, which is wonderful. But when was our turn to be the important ones? When we were little, it was all about the grown-ups. When we became a grown-up, it was all about the child. And somewhere in the middle, those baby boomer people, and I'm going to focus on the women because that's where my study has been for years. And those baby boomer women had to do some emotional repair work. I call it that we are the therapy generation, that we had to learn about our feelings. We had to deal with generational wounds because our parents didn't know how to handle those emotions, those awful things that they saw, all the things that they dealt with, all the tension, all of that. And we didn't know our own, and yet here we are supposed to help our children to be emotionally sound creatures in the world. And that was a hard place, and it drove many of us to seek out some sort of help for it. Some went to therapy, some went to religion, some went to the hippie way. You know, we tried many things. And I really think that our generation, no, we weren't the greatest generation, but we've offered a great service to bring back some emotional balance to the world. We told the guys that it was okay to have emotions. Okay, maybe we told them a little too much and we need to come back to center. but we helped them to process it. We helped us to process this. Some of us dealt with mother wounds. You can hear that on my podcasts. You can hear that in many places. Mother wounds are very deep, deep wounds in your heart. It's hard to even say that word out loud because we think of mother and we think of that as supposed to be everything that's wonderful and right in the world. And in many, many ways it can be. But in many ways, if there's a emotional wound there, it really ripples down to the next generation. Those people in the therapy generation, I I see that was our key. I see that the baby boomer women had two main purposes. And the first purpose that may have taken up a good share of the first half of their life was to get their emotional selves back into balance, to heal the emotional wounds. Maybe if the parents weren't able to help with the emotional well-being of the child may have had a developmental emotional wound, and that takes incredible work to bring it to balance. And yet, as baby boomers, we had that wonderful need for doing a good job and wanting to honor our parents. We're very work ethic, strong work ethics, and we wanted to help our children to become all that they could be. So we gave to our children even when our cup was empty, as we were learning how to fill our own cup. Okay. I saw a picture the other day when I was looking on Instagram, and it was a beautiful picture. It was kind of egg shaped, and it showed a series of women, like four generations of women, one sitting right in front of the other, and the youngest woman had a baby in her womb. And the idea behind this picture, you could also see it if you were thinking of nested dolls, like the old Russian nested dolls, the child's toy. Well, it says that when you have a grandmother and then a mother, and the mother has a female daughter, that when the middle woman, the mother, is in the womb of her mother at around 4 to 5 months along in the pregnancy, that the female child in the mother has all of the eggs that the child version will ever have in their lifetime. So in an instance, the granddaughter is the seed for the granddaughter is actually in the womb of the grandmother. Now take a minute to think about it, that a woman was myself when my mom was carrying me and her mom was carrying her. That's hard to do. That during that little period of time, the egg of me was inside of my grandmother. And that kind of could say why we have such a good bond between granddaughters and grandmothers. That leads me to the second point that I want to make. One was our baby boomer women are doing the emotional healing work for themselves and for as many generational wounds as they are able to heal. And the second part of ours I see as more of a preventative purpose. Now, you just heard me talk about the connections of the granddaughters to the grandmothers. Well, I ran across this book by Carol Schaefer, and the book is called Grandmother's Counsel for the World. Okay. Remember Pope Francis when he said the women can change the system of power in the world? Well, this book about the grandmothers is about a group of 13 indigenous women from around the world. And these women were full grown, they were in the later years of their life, and they had lived through many things. Each grandmother had lived through their culture's calamities and events and wonderful things and awful things. And this book is about a group of these women coming together. And the story begins that one elder woman hands to her daughter 13 feathers and 13 stones. And the elder woman says to her, at one point in your life, these are going to be important, but you're going to have to wait. Well, that young girl did have to wait till she became the grandmother and the elder. And she talked about calling in these women from around the world. And she would be calling in 13 women. And it was a wonderful day when she could give one of those feathers, a symbol, to each one of these women, and a small rock to each one of these women. And that they would come together and share their wisdom to help the world. Now, yes, you have a collection of that many women from that many places around the world with that many cumulative years of life and wisdom gathered. They certainly would be a force to be reckoned with. And did you know, uh, and I hope I have the right word to use here, that in the Native American culture, Indians culture, that they did not go to war unless the women of the village agreed to it. Now, think about that. You might think about the men as the ones that would want to go to the war, but that culture would not allow themselves to actually go to war unless the women were on board with it. Well, think about it. As a woman, you bear the child and you nurture it and you bring it up and you bring it to adulthood. And we know that countries send their young men and now young women off to war, and it isn't always, not all of them come home. And the women especially would know that, and they knew that the women would not put their child in that situation unless it was absolutely beyond necessary. And that gave them a balance in their system. It respected the knowledge of each other. And I think that's an important thing. And remember when I said way back when the pilgrim lady, she had to leave certain things behind and go ahead? Well, each generation takes us a little further, like the hippie generation. Okay, so we got longer hair, we got weirder clothes. There's the free love summer. Okay, and a lot of that look pretty foolish, I'm sure, to those older than us, but it moved us along as a culture. Some places it moved us too far along. And I think that's the important part of the grandmothers and the baby boomers generation. If you picture a sieve, you know, the thing you put berries in and you pour water over it to wash them and it lets all the dirt come out and you save the good berries. And I think, in my opinion, what may has been happening with so many families being divorced, being separated all over the world. Maybe there's two or three different fathers in a collection of the mother's children. You've kind of lose touch of that family unit, and especially the grandmother may not be close to where the granddaughter is. And let me give you this example here. This is will help tie it back together. I saw a post the other day, and they were asking for opinions, and it was kind of intended as a fun post, but many of the answers were very serious. It said, what would you bring back from the 60s if you could? And, we get the good cars and the nice music and, that type of thing was some of the answers. But some of the answers were manners, respect, pride for work. And this post had gone out to many, many people. I don't even remember the number, like 22,000 people. And I put pride in your work, and my response alone has had over 150 replies to it. And the manners and respect, they got even more than that. And I think what we need to come back to is, yes, each generation takes us further. They're supposed to. And that can be a very wonderful thing. Look at the healing that have come about in so many medical ways, in the technology ways. But we also have to make sure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, that we let the grandmother's time with the granddaughters to help put back in those things like manner and respect. Yes, we know the young moms are working as hard as they can, trying to keep up with their families, keep up with their jobs, keep up with so much, be the trailblazers for new things. But sometimes I think what has happened is there are some key values that are being washed out with the new inventions. And the inventions can be wonderful. We need to check out with the AI to make sure we're making the positive choices. But even still, I think we need to make sure that we're not giving up things that are wonderful and can hold us together as a family and as a nation and as a people. So I it's my suggestion that we rein re use the technology we have, use the time, the FaceTime or whatever Zoom time with your grandchildren to help bring back those things. No, not as a hound him, you've got to say yes or you've got to say please and thank you. Just bring it back in gently, bring it back in love. The grandmothers, they can do that. They have enough years and experience behind them. But we can talk about what was important and what was valuable. Not everything is valuable, but things like respect, that's important. I read articles all the time on Facebook, different women when they talk about, I give my grandchild a gift and they never say thank you. They don't have any manners. They don't even, I keep giving them, how long do I keep giving them gifts? They don't even bother to call me back. That's a big one for older people. Okay. Maybe there's some of those traits that can be put back in, that we can do it in a gentle way so that when we go forward, that we don't lose what's most precious to our hearts. And that's the end of my story.